There are days when you look in the mirror and suddenly see that familiar face no longer feels as familiar as before. It's not just a change in appearance, but a whole journey that transforms them to the point where they themselves have to learn to get used to themselves again. We often only see the final result, an impressive new version, but behind that is a long process filled with pressure. Moments of wanting to give up and difficult decisions. So, if you could see the entire journey, would you still view those transformations in the same way? If you find this content interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Missy Elliott never needed to fit into any mold to stand out. She created her own standards. In an industry obsessed with image, she emerged with an unmistakable style, breaking existing boundaries and helping to reshape hip-hop in her own unique way. Missy's talent was so powerful that it rendered standards of appearance secondary. She wasn't just famous, she became an icon. But while the spotlight shone brightly, another story unfolded quietly behind the scenes. In 2008, Missy Elliott was diagnosed with Graves' disease, an autoimmune disorder that can affect the nervous system, muscles, and even the cardiovascular system. From that point on, it was no longer simply a story about image or public pressure. It became much more personal and far more serious. Her transformation didn't stem from a desire to change her appearance, but from a need to adapt her lifestyle. When audiences began to notice the changes in Missy's appearance, what they didn't see was the whole story behind it, an unscripted, unshortcut, and unpredictable battle. Instead of retreating, she chose to proactively take control of her situation, maintaining a regular workout routine, staying disciplined, and prioritizing her health. She lost about 30 pounds, but that number was never the most important thing. More important was the strength she built throughout the process, not to impress but to adapt, not to change her image, but to confront a body that no longer functioned as before. Over time, the difference became apparent, but not in a loud or flashy way. This isn't a dramatic transformation, but the result of a persistent journey, where each small step represents a quiet victory. Ultimately, Missy Elliott's story isn't just about weight or appearance. It's about keeping moving forward, even when your own body starts changing the rules of the game. Roseanne Barr never tried to be the ideal image Hollywood expected, and that's what made her different. For a long time, she was not just a television star, but an icon of rare authenticity on screen. No glitz, no embellishment, no pursuit of beauty standards. A woman with the spirit of the working class, outspoken, genuine, and unasking for permission to be herself. To some, that was a valuable, relatable quality. To others, it was a source of controversy. But whether they loved her or not, the public associated that image with her. For years, it seemed no one thought that would change. But then, behind the spotlight, a quiet journey began. No fanfare, no announcements, no need for attention. Just small, repetitive changes, happening daily in her private life where there were no cameras and no audience. And when Roseanne reappeared, the difference was undeniable. For the public, it came so quickly, almost unexpectedly. The image that had been associated with her for years suddenly changed, leaving many wondering, what were they really seeing? She described it all very simply: eating less, exercising more. But behind that simplicity lay a difficult process: discipline, perseverance, and confronting long-standing habits. And the story now revolves around appearance. It becomes a story of control, not just over one's body, but over how one is perceived. Roseanne Barr didn't just change her appearance. She broke free from the mold the world had imposed on her. And that raises a bigger question. When a person changes to this extent, have they become someone else? Or are they finally being seen for who they truly are? Drew Carey used to be the kind of person who could turn himself into material for laughter, and audiences completely embraced it. In the world of comedy, his appearance wasn't just a personal trait. It seemed to become an integral part of his roles. His weight appeared in his lines, in his scripts, in how the public perceived him. It was so familiar that no one questioned it. Everything seemed set in place. But there are boundaries that laughter can't hide forever. When the chest pains began, everything changed almost instantly. It was no longer a matter of stage presence or lighthearted jokes, but an undeniable warning. The subsequent emergency angioplasty not only saved him from danger, but also forced him to confront a truth clearer than any role. This was no longer a matter of appearance, but a matter of survival. There were no loud announcements or fanfares afterward. Drew chose to quietly step out of the public eye to focus on a journey unseen by the public, a strictly controlled diet, a consistent workout routine, and most importantly, a transformation of lifestyles that had lasted for years. This wasn't a quick process, nor was it easy, but this time the motivation wasn't about image or recognition, but about the need to change to survive. Over time, the change began to show, and when he returned, many barely recognized him. The man once associated with jokes about his weight now appeared completely different, slimmer, healthier, and more proactive in his lifestyle. But what makes this story thought-provoking isn't the new appearance. It's the reason behind it, because sometimes people don't change because they want to. They changed because they were forced to. Jonah Hill once made the world laugh, but few realized he had almost no chance of being seen beyond that. For years, he was stuck with a familiar image, the funny, somewhat clumsy, often chubby guy in movies like Superbad. His appearance wasn't just a minor detail in his roles, it gradually became central to how the public perceived him. And Hollywood seemed so accustomed to that image that it didn't want it to change. But then a quiet question arose. If people only see you through one mold, do you still have a chance to become someone else? Jonah chose to answer that question in a way that wasn't easy. He didn't simply want to change his appearance, he wanted to break free from the image that had defined his name. That meant overcoming both industry expectations and ingrained habits built up over many years. There are no shortcuts here. Only discipline, training, lifestyle adjustments, and a determination strong enough not to revert to the old ways. The change didn't happen quickly, but as it became apparent, the world immediately took notice. Questions began to surface everywhere. Is that really Jonah Hill? Faster, more confident, more composed, as if he had stepped out of the image people had previously held of him. But the most important thing wasn't his appearance. As Jonah changed, the roles that came his way changed too. He was no longer confined to a fixed type of character. He proved that he wasn't just a comedy to make others laugh, but an actor with depth, maturity, and the ability to redefine himself. And this raises a more thought-provoking question. How many people are also being labeled with a label they never chose? And if one day they change, will we be ready to see them in a different light? If you've watched this far, ask yourself this. Would you recognize Jonah Hill at first glance after he has changed? Josh Peck didn't change in a single moment. It was a slow, almost imperceptible process. In the memories of many viewers, he's always been associated with the image of the chubby, funny teenager in Drake, Josh, a role so familiar that it gradually became his identity in the public eye. Not only the character, but his real self was also placed into the same mold. Over time, the line between the role and Josh himself began to blur, but behind the laughter on screen was a silent, lingering pressure, not just from his appearance, but from how he was perceived, repeated expectations, fixed definitions that he didn't choose himself. Hollywood seemed to have created a version of him, and defaulted to that being the person he had to maintain. There was no dramatic turning point, no attention-grabbing announcement. It was just very ordinary, repetitive changes, eating more moderately, exercising more regularly, and persevering even when no one was watching. Then, at some point when he reappeared, the difference became so obvious it was hard to ignore. It was still the same familiar face, but the gaze and demeanor were different. Gentler, more steadfast, and it felt like he was truly in control of his life. The most important thing wasn't the weight change. It was that he no longer let others define who he was. No magic, no shortcuts, just a long process of discipline. Awareness and unwavering commitment to personal choices, Josh Peck didn't abandon his old self. He simply stepped out of the mold that had once held him, and in a very quiet way, he rewrote his own story not to impress, but to become the version he chose for himself. Graham Elliott is the kind of person you'd easily think had reached the top early on a talented chef. A well-established name and a presence on big stages like MasterChef, he represents the epitome of success in the world of fine dining. Confident, charismatic, and always in control in front of millions of viewers, but alongside that glamour, there was an increasingly hard-to-ignore reality. His body was changing in a worrying way. His weight had increased by around 400 pounds over 180 kg, to the point where simple actions like getting out of his car became a challenge. This was no longer just a matter of appearance, but a clear sign that his health was being pushed to its limits. The turning point came in 2013 when he made a life-changing decision to have partial gastric bypass surgery. But it wasn't an easy shortcut. It was just the beginning of a whole new journey, one where he was forced to rebuild how he perceived and controlled his relationship with food. For someone whose entire life had been intertwined with cooking and culinary enjoyment, this wasn't just a physical change, but a profound internal struggle. After the surgery, everything had to adjust. A stricter diet, exercise became a habit, and discipline became non-negotiable. There was no turning back, only daily perseverance. And the results came so quickly that many were surprised in just a few months. He lost about 130 pounds, almost 60 kg, resulting in a dramatic and almost unrecognizable transformation. But what makes Graham Elliott's story remarkable isn't the amount of weight he lost. It's the fact that he managed to change the hardest thing, his relationship with food. When what was once the center of your life becomes your biggest challenge, overcoming it isn't simply about losing weight, it's about redefining yourself. Kirstie Alley was once the epitome of a star who seemed to always be in control, at least on screen. During her peak with Cheers, she lived up to Hollywood expectations, captivating, confident, and possessing the kind of look that conformed to industry standards. But behind that glamour lay a struggle. She didn't completely hide a complex relationship with food and periods of imbalance that the public only saw a small part of. Then things began to change, not from a sudden decision, but over time, as she entered menopause. Her body changed in ways no longer under her familiar control. Her metabolism slowed, her weight increased not dramatically, but steadily, little by little. And in a relatively short period, her familiar public image was replaced by a different version, drawing in endless attention, commentary, and gossip. But Kirstie's story never followed a straight line. It was more like a loop. Her weight fluctuating between gains and losses, all happening right in the public eye. There were times she lost significant weight through shows like Jenny Craig, but then some of it would come back. Each time, it wasn't just a personal change, but a topic of public discussion. Even so, she never truly stopped. Each time she started again, she returned with renewed discipline and effort, along with the same perseverance she displayed in public, as in Dancing with the Stars, where she showcased not only her physical transformation, but also her enduring spirit. What makes Kirstie Alley's journey remarkable is not just her physical transformation, but it's about what lies behind it: the pressure, the trauma, and the relentless struggle to regain control in an environment that constantly demands perfection. Because while the world only sees the numbers on the scale, she's facing something far bigger than that. Mama June, name once synonymous with controversy, judgment, and virtually no second chance in the public eye. For years, June Shannon wasn't just a reality TV star, she was the center of attention. Her appearance, her past, her lifestyle, everything was under constant scrutiny. Little by little, her image in the eyes of others narrowed, as if her true self was only what viewers saw on screen. Then, at a point when many believed the story would never change, she chose a completely different path, not with minor adjustments, but with a pivotal decision. June invested a significant sum, approximately $75,000, into her transformation, including weight loss surgery and cosmetic procedures. This wasn't just a change in appearance. It was a clear effort to break free from the image the world had assigned her for so long. The results surprised many. Over 300 pounds, approximately 136 kg, were gone. The transformation was so drastic that many could barely recognize her. It wasn't simply a makeover, but more like a completely new beginning. But the hardest part wasn't the weight loss. It was maintaining it. Keeping a new body required strict discipline, a complete change in eating habits, and building a lifestyle completely different from the past. And that was the real battle, a battle repeated every day. Fought without cameras, without the gaze of an audience. Mama June's story is more than just attention-grabbing because of the dramatic transformation. But the question it leaves behind is, can a person truly leave their old self completely, or does the past always try to pull them back? If you've watched this far, share your thoughts. Do you believe people can completely change? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories.